Hey guys, welcome back. In today's video, we are talking about the AMC 200X, how there are no more shorts available, the 4.5 trillion margin call, and many more in this video. First, we're taking a look at this. They never tell you what or how those companies/stocks were impacted by those billions of micro cap shares. Now, I advise anyone to obviously take a look at this. Essentially, what we are seeing is how the SEC has agreed to drop the matter without any admission of fault or penalties for either side. So once again, what they have done is that big institutions who have made hundreds of millions of dollars were getting a free getaway from what they have done. And we've seen this plenty of times in the past. Some examples we always give is how companies like Goldman Sachs were only fined $1 million despite the fact what they did made them hundreds of millions of dollars. And we've said how that is not a consequence, but rather the cost of business. And so we have seen how regulations have allowed these institutions to get away with so many things in the past. And so just because, and this is very, very important, because a lot of people don't think that because SEC is not taking any actions on synthetics, on naked short selling, and that there is no cases of that. But clearly we know that that is not the case, because SEC and any other regulations have let these institutions get away from this. But this doesn't mean that it's gone. This doesn't mean that it's disappeared. It just means that there are no severe consequences as of right now. We talked about how they're kicking the can down the road. And you have to remember, yes, firms like Citadel, firms like Virtue, these big short institutions who have been shorting AMC for the longest time, have not seen any consequences, but it doesn't mean that there are no more synthetics. And it only means that when they have to pay for it, they have to pay for it for thousands of dollars for just a singular share of AMC. Because when you take a look at what's happened with AMC in the past and you take into account how long it's been, you understand the situation of this. You can see AMC float was a minimum sold short 20 times over the authorized float back in 2021. 1 billion shares traded when there were only 50 million shares available to trade. Float sold over 20 times in 2021, then they turned off the buy button. You can only imagine how many times over it sold 4.5 years later. Could be 200 times over or more. We were never wrong. We are never leaving. $800,000 per dollar shares, $800,000 per share, Lightberg A is no joke. So essentially what this is that every one of you would have known how many times the float has been sold over on AMC. We've talked about how there are practically new synthetic shares of AMC being created every single day. The reason we understand this is because the float has already been bought up, and there is no possible way we're still seeing the liquidity in AMC when the retail have already bought the float and have not sold any of their shares. Now, if we are still able to continuously buy these shares while there are no more shares issued, it would be because of these shorts who are rehypothecating shares every single day. Now, we don't know to an exact amount how many shares they've created, whether it's back in 2021 or whether it's now. What we do know was that back in 2021, they rehypothecated shares. They were synthetics of AMC. The float was sold many times. What we also know is that over these years, they've still been continuing these practices. And so up until now, when we understand that this has been going on for so long, we know that there are so many synthetic shares out there. It could be 200 times, it could be 2,000 times. Like I said, we don't know the exact number, the exact data that shows this, but this is what we talked about with how the SEC don't want to take action on this, because they also understand there have been so many shares of AMC being created. What they're hoping for is either AMC goes bankrupt or the retail sells. They understand if they were to take action and they were forcing these short sellers to cover right now, then multiple institutions will go bankrupt. Now, what this means is that it's not that because SEC is not taking action, we won't ever see the squeeze. It just means that SEC is hoping retail leaves first or AMC goes bankrupt. And if it comes down to it, when there is no way for them to kick the can down the road, then that will be the squeeze happening. That will be all these institutions going bankrupt because they're paying thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of dollars for a singular share of AMC when they have to buy back all these billions shares of AMCs that they created in the past. And it's why we've said that they are worried about what's happening. And you can see when they take action, because what we've seen recently is Genius Group actually taking action as they're filing a lawsuit for naked short selling. And instantly, as you see these lawsuits, there become 0 shares available to borrow for Genius Group. So this is obviously the effect that it can have. Now, the difference for this and the reason why this hasn't blown up like what AMC will do or GME will do when it squeezes is because of the market cap difference. It's because of the synthetic shares difference. Genius Group have obviously faced naked short selling. AMC and GME aren't the only companies to face it. It's just that they face it on a much larger scale than any other firms. So when we do see firms like Genius Groups who are also, filing these lawsuits, they have to understand that there hasn't been enough synthetic shares created like there is for AMC. We have to realize how long it's been, and we have to realize most of their capital, their resources have been allocated to obviously short AMC and GME. But you can still see, even when it's a firm like Genius Group who has less synthetic shares than AMC, you can see how this affects the short sellers. And it's why we've said that if a Genius Group were able to see this sort of traction, you can only imagine what will happen when AMC and GME do the same. Another thing to realize is XRT borrow fee dropped from 2.56% to 1.78%, and now only 500 shares left. That's not a borrow, that's a desperate gasp for oxygen in a crowded short squeeze sauna. They're scraping the bottom of the ETF barrel. What we talked about is how XRT is obviously used as a way of shorting AMC, as a way of shorting GME. And again, there are multiple other funds they use as well. XRT is the ones that have been highlighted the most. What we have seen recently is, despite the fact that billions of dollars have been pulled out of these ETFs, which we have shown on data, they are still trying their best to locate and borrow shares of XRT. And once again, the reason why they're doing this is because they are afraid of what's happening. They are constantly suppressing AMC and GME. That's something that we all know. We've talked about multiple methods that they have used in the past. There still could be methods that they are using in which we don't know. But some of the biggest ones that they have done is things like XRT funds, is things like tokenizations that we have said in the past. And so you can see from this just how desperate these shorts are to borrow shares. Now, there's a big reason for why they're doing this, and it's to do with how much money they have borrowed. So this is the post that we are looking at, where we have to understand FINRA's margin loans of $784 billion doesn't include the $4.5 trillion in margin loans to hedge funds. And this was as of March 31st, 2024. So if you want a more detailed explanation on this, feel free to check out. The link will be in the description, where essentially what we are seeing is the government numbers on margin loans don't even tell half the story on how much can kicking is happening. Because you have to understand, FINRA's margin loans of $784 billion doesn't include the $4.5 trillion in margin loans to hedge funds. So you guys can understand how big of a number is involved. Now, of course, not all $4.5 trillion is used to short AMC and GME. Of course not. But what we understand is that there is a large portion of that going towards it. And what we have to understand as well is that when AMC and GME squeezes, a lot of this money will actually be involved in paying it back. And furthermore, you have to understand that this is only the very minimum, because firstly, this is as of March 31st, 2024. So it's been a whole year and 3 months since then, since this data has been released. Another thing is that this has obviously gotten and probably have gotten a lot bigger since then. But another data to look at is, unfortunately, FINRA only has access to margin debt data filed by the brokerage firms it regulates. And so this is from the brokerage firms in which it regulates. This doesn't even include all the other ones that haven't reported their data. And so already, even if we were to go back in time, even if we were to look at it back in March 31st, the 4.5 trillion would have only been the very minimum, because it has access to limited data. Not only that, we have seen how brokerage and firms work along with these institutions. We've seen how brokerage and firms have reported false data. And so once again, the 4.5 trillion, only the very minimum. Now, you see the 4.5 trillion, you understand just how much money is involved in this whole situation. And you also notice that the vast bulk of margin debt is now being loaned out not by brokerage firms, but by giant banks where the US taxpayer will be on the hook for a bailout. You see why this situation is so big. We understand that banks have access to a lot of money and they've lent it out to these these institutions. Once again, when you take a look at Bank of America, you understand how much money they've lent out to Citadel. And yet, despite that, Citadel is still in need of money. And so this is what we've said. When short sellers claim that they are not shorting AMC, when they claim that they have covered the AMC shorts, we know that is not the case because they have already sunk in hundreds of billions of dollars, if not trillions of dollars, because we know that that's how much money is out there circulating. But yeah, guys, thanks for watching this video. I'll catch you guys next time.